Thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm Leon Kay, the executive editor of Triple Pundit, and I have with me Audrey Choi. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Morgan Stanley, as well as the CEO of the Morgan Stanley Institute for Sustainable Investing. Audrey, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to have this talk.
Oh, thank you, Harry. Leon, it's great to be here.
So let's start at a very basic level. Let's look at what's happened over the past year. Face it, plastic pollution really didn't get a lot of attention over the past year during 2020. A lot of people would say, obviously, it's because of the pandemic. And then during the summer, we had the calls for the protests, the calls for racial justice. So the concern over the plastic crisis really fell into the background. What would be your response to that?
Well, look, I think you're right that plastic pollution and plastic waste, the awareness of it had really been ratcheting up enormously, up through 2019, and then with the pandemic, it did take a bit of a backseat in people's minds. Unfortunately, it did not take a backseat in terms of an issue. In fact, we partner very closely with Dr. Jenna Jambak. She's probably the preeminent researcher in the world around plastic waste, and especially plastic waste that ends up in nature. And she has a marine debris tracker that we've been partnering with her on. And she found that within, I think it was like 10 days to 2 weeks of the initial shutdown orders and the mask orders, she could actually track the data of an increase of PPE that was landing up in nature or in all sorts of places where it shouldn't be, because people were wearing masks and gloves and then didn't quite know what to do with them. And they were, so you saw an immediate uptick in PPE, plastic waste. And then also as more and more things started to be, individually shrink wrapped, and that the problem of plastic waste packaging actually has increased. And interestingly, from a social justice perspective, I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that globally, as well as domestically within communities, that it is the low-income communities, and especially the low-income communities of color, that are actually most adversely impacted when plastic waste ends up where it shouldn't be. So it's something that, unfortunately, as an issue, has continued to really even grow. And I think that we will soon see more attention turning back to it, both as an environmental issue and as a social justice issue.
So the fact that people are noticing this within 2 weeks, when honestly a lot of people like myself, we didn't really think of this until maybe 7, 8, 9 months into this crisis, is an eye-opener. Wow. Well, that leads me to this question. Then I'm curious. So what's a financial company like Morgan Stanley doing, being concerned with this? Why is it mattering to you? Curious.
Yeah, so look, a number of reasons. So it was about 2 years ago in 2019 that we actually made our firm-wide commitment, the Morgan Stanley Plastic Waste Resolution, where we committed to doing our part to facilitate the prevention, reduction, or removal of 50 million tons of plastic waste from reaching nature. And you're exactly right, Leon. A lot of people said, why does a finance firm care about it? Like, you're not a big part of the value chain. You're not a disproportionately large user of plastic. And we said, look, that's right, but the more we looked at the problem, the more we realized that this was a global, cross-sector, cross-industry, kind of woven right into the fabric of our economy problem. And no one individual, no one company, and not even any one sector could solve it, alone. And that we had to actually think about what is the role of the producers of plastic, the users of plastic, the large CPG companies, the consumers, and also the governments and municipalities dealing with recycling, collection, end of life. And you had to find some way of think about all of those and bringing those strands together. And when you think about all those sectors, those are actually our clients, right? We do work with everyone from the largest chemical companies and fossil fuel companies and CPG companies and consumers and governments. And so we said, look, finance can really be a tool and a way in to understand how do we think differently about this problem. It's also, frankly, a huge economic issue. Frankly, anyone who cares about economy from both senses of the word, it's an uneconomical set of decisions that we're currently making. If you look just at single-use plastic packaging alone, we're throwing away up to $120 billion worth of value, often after minutes of use. Right? That's just a waste. And so I think all of us as economists, as business folks, really care about how can we do better with that.
So I like how it's a nice reminder how all of these industries they're not silos.
Correct.
Really, everything is integrated. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I would like to get a little more specific then. You are clearly well-versed on this challenge, this crisis. So I'd like to know what exactly then is Morgan Stanley itself? What are you and your colleagues doing about plastic waste?
Yeah. So look, I mean, we very much view this as something that we need to think about in a holistic way. So as I said, one of the things we're doing is partnering with academics like Dr. Jenna Jambak, University of Michigan Sustainable Systems experts to understand the nature of the problem, right? Because as you said, if we don't actually understand how quickly this is a problem, it's harder to galvanize action. But we're also then working with our corporate clients and with our clients who come to us for investing strategies and investment advice. So with the corporate clients, for example, we worked with Pepsi to issue their first ever green bond. It was $1 billion issuance, and a large chunk of the proceeds were devoted specifically to helping Pepsi reduce the virgin plastic across their beverage chains. That's a real business change that they're trying to finance. We also worked with Alphabet, and they issued their first sustainability bond, again, where they were thinking about circular economy, plastic waste as a component of that. On the other hand, we're also working with individual investors. We actually designed, for example, a number of products, one of which was an investment product where for a minimum as low as $10,000 of an investment, you could actually invest in a portfolio aligned with plastic waste reduction. And really interestingly, Leon, that ended up being one of the fastest growing products we've ever put onto the wealth management platform within just a matter of months. It was over 100 million, and within a few more months, it was over 200 million. And again, this is in $10,000 bites. So we're seeing a way to really sort of productize this and make it accessible for clients. We also then did a deep data dive, and we worked with Selective to actually an index creator to actually create an index around plastic waste reduction. So that when individuals like you or institutions say we do care about this issue, we don't know how to address it. We're like, well, here's actually data and tools. You can have investment products aligned to it. So it's through those kinds of partnerships that we're really trying to drive scale solutions that include but exceed your ability as an individual to not use a plastic cup.
Right. So I think I'm going to use that opportunity to then tell our audience, by the way, Morgan Stanley does a lot of great research on topics like these. So I don't have a URL, but I can say if you do what I do, which is just type Morgan Stanley research, you'll find a lot of great information on these topics. So this is great. So far you've told us what you've seen out there in the landscape with this plastic crisis. You've just told us a little about what you and Morgan Stanley are doing. Now I'd like to dive in a bit about what you're hearing. What are you hearing from your stakeholders about this crisis? What are they asking you to do? What's the feedback you're getting?
Yeah, no, look, we are absolutely hearing from our clients that they do care deeply about these issues, and that I think that more than anything, they are really understanding how these issues are coming together. So the Morgan Stanley Institute for Sustainable Investing, as you mentioned, does do a bunch of research. One of the things we've done over the past 8 years has been polling investors exactly to your point, to ask them, what do they care about? When we first started out, we saw that there was, a strong and steadily growing interest in sustainable investing. So I think in the first time we did it, maybe 8 years ago, 71% of investors said that they cared about sustainable investing or were interested in finding out more. That's now up to 85%, 96% among millennials. But more recently, there's been more kind of specificity and sophistication. And what investors say now is they don't want to just know that this is an investment that's sustainable, whatever that means. They want to actually know, what theme am I impacting? How am I really having an impact? And the themes they are most interested in, the top 3, and they were all clustered very closely, was climate change, plastic waste reduction, and circular economy. Right. So first of all, even just from an ecosystem perspective, people are really understanding, right, that plastic waste reduction, if you care about biodiversity, then you need to care about the oceans, which means you need to care about all of the microparticles of plastic, where there's more microparticles of plastic in the sea than there are stars in the sky. If you care about climate change, you need to care about billions and billions of products that are plastic, barely used, and then they sit there, and then that is not an efficient use of carbon and carbon emissions. In 2020, what I think we've seen even more is that people are finally understanding the intersectionality between environmental issues, social justice issues, economic opportunity, race. And so we're really seeing, and then plastic, I think, is, it is one of many great I say that with air quotes, great case studies of how these combine, right? We are seeing that poor communities of color are subjected to higher levels of air pollution because of higher proximity towards industrial facilities. They're subject to higher concentrations of plastic waste and other waste landing in and near their communities. They're actually also subject to hotter temperatures in the summer. Literally, a low-income neighborhood that was previously redlined and not given great access to credit in the same meteorological zone as a rich neighborhood can be up to 12 degrees hotter in the summer than the rich neighborhood because it doesn't have sidewalks and trees and water elements and parks. And so you combine higher heat, higher vulnerability to heat-related diseases, higher particulate matter, higher vulnerability to respiratory disease, more garbage, including plastic waste landing up there. It's unfortunately not a surprise you're seeing higher rates of COVID infection, hospitalization, and death. So this has really been a year where I think everyone has finally started to understand that E, S, and G are not silos, but really a nexus of issues.
I really appreciate the fact that you've articulated that environmental and social issues are not separate. They're so integrated. So on that point, I'd like to go ahead and connect the dots here. So talk to me as if maybe I'm a mid to higher, maybe I've got a mid to higher position within a company. I'm down the hallway from the C-suite. And I'd like to, again, connect the dots. And if you could really articulate a couple action items for business leaders that are looking to take on plastic waste, that realize they've got to do something that maybe they just don't know where to start.
Yeah, no, so I would say, first of all, do not believe for a second that the plastic waste issue is only something for the sustainability folks down the hall. Right? I firmly believe that because plastic is so pervasive in our daily lives as consumers, in our economy, in any single industrial process, really in anything, every single department, division, profession, industry has a touch point to it. So yes, if you're a chief sustainability officer, of course you would understand that. If you're a chief marketing officer, your brand could be very damaged if your brand is emblazoned on some product that ends up in a viral photo of a marine creature or someone else who was harmed by it, or near on a waste dump. But your brand can also be enhanced if you're the one actually changing that and using more recycled content or eliminating plastic in your chain. If you're a logistics officer or a chief financial officer, if you actually examine your supply chain and your distribution and your packaging, you might actually be able to take a huge amount of cost out of the system. Because so often we're doing things that we don't need to. I mean, like there's during the pandemic, actually, I early on, I got some masks and I found some that were made out of recycled plastic. When they came, these recycled plastic masks, the cloth or the recycled plastic was inside a cellophane wrapper, inside a plastic envelope with bubble wrap inside the shipping container. That's just a waste of cost and the production of waste, right? And defeats the purpose of your brand prop. So I would say really what I would say the biggest takeaway would be, no matter what you are, look at what your function is, whether it's finance, regulatory risk, marketing, operations, and say, where do I touch plastic in my day job? And where is it the best, highest necessary use of that really interesting substance? And where is it where maybe I ought to think differently?
I really like how you, in just a couple minutes, were able to talk to the marketing and financial folks and supply chain folks all in the same breath. And I think you just really demonstrated how you really showed that this is not an ESG or a CSR challenge. This is a huge challenge, period. And I really hope that marketers out there heard that part and understand that, these days with social media, nobody wants to see their logo spreading like wildfire across social for all the wrong reasons. But the financial aspects are very important too.
Yeah.
So, go ahead. Did you have any final points?
I was just going to end, just to underscore that, Liam, I would just say the reason that I'm optimistic about this is that, look, plastic was invented around 70 years ago. It really kind of came into pervasive use during your and my lifetimes, right? And we had to be taught by marketers to use it, to throw it away, to think that it was and we actually learned all these behaviors today, right? Like our grandparents didn't do these kinds of things. We had to learn those. And so I believe that if we can harness marketers and financials and everyone else to understand how do we reinvent them in better ways. That it's completely doable. We created this problem. We have to be able to create our solutions to get ourselves out of it.
Well, this was fantastic. Everything from start to finish, I think you taught us a lot. You made us think a lot. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, Audrey, Choi, really appreciate you making time for us today. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon. Terrific to be with you.